Welcome, everybody. I'm Jason Mefford, and I'm here with Brad Miller, and we are walking a spiritual path with you today. Bad joke from Jason because I'm old enough. I don't know if you remember the show Fantasy Island, Brad, or if you're
Unfortunately
okay.
for you,
It's
no.
it's 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 before that anyway. Okay, so at the beginning of the show, um, because Fantasy Island was like this vacation fantasy thing, so people would fly in an airplane to this vacation spot. And so the little sidekick of the boss, whenever there'd be a plane, he'd go, "Boss, the plane, the plane." So today we're not going to talk about the plane, but we're going to talk about the plants. The plants, the plants, the plants, the plants, right?
Mhm.
So bad joke. Anyway,
Yeah, but
gosh, I'm getting old enough that some of these different references that I make and most of the people listening are going to be like, what? Anyway, um,
doesn't matter. Keep making them.
side
We'll.
side bit of trivia: Fantasy Island was actually it was taped in L.A. There's a park in L.A. where that actual house and everything was used. Anyway, um, so the plants, right? So before we started, Brad and I always kind of talk a little bit. Hey, what's going on? How you doing? And Brad said, "Oh, it's been raining a lot. You know, nice if it stops raining." And I'm like, "Huh, it's been raining a lot here too, right? The last 3 or 4 days, I think we've been getting a lot of rain."
Mhm.
And, it's one of those where, um, yeah, it maybe puts a hamper on what we can do outside. But I've really come to appreciate the rain, right? Because the rain does a lot of things, right? It's water element
Mhm.
in one way,
Yeah.
but it usually clears the atmosphere, clears the air, right? Because as the rain is coming down, it's picking up all that particulate matter. And so, usually when you go outside right after it's rained, oh, it smells so good, right? It smells so good right after a rain. But also, it's springtime and the plants need the water, right? And just
Mhm.
like we've talked before about the different elements and how all of the different elements, help and work together and get transmuted together. This is one of those, right? Again, fire, the sun, touching the plants for the photosynthesis, right? That needs to go on,
Mhm.
the water that it needs to drink, the earth, that it's in, and the nutrients it gets from that, as well as the wind moving things like hummingbirds and bees, right? To kind of help
Pollen blowing. Yep.
pollen blowing, seeds blowing,
Seeds. Yep.
all the stuff like that because there's a little town called Cottonwood about 15 miles away because they have cottonwood trees, right? Not a lot of cottonwood trees per se here, but every so often I see some little cotton floating in the air, right? That's come
Mhm.
over from cottonwood. So we thought it would be good to talk about plants because that was one of the things that had popped into Brad's mind today. So Brad,
Yeah.
what thoughts about plants or, what guidance are you
Mm.
being given?
Well, we talked in the past about animals. About animal medicine, about animal friends, the benefits of pets. I think we've talked about to some extent. How the frequency of purrs of a cat is actually healing. How a lot of times pets, animals, dogs, cats, um, they can cleanse us, help clear out negative energies and things like that from us by being around us, and how they're good to be around. Um, but we haven't really talked about plants a lot. And like you said, it's something that kind of popped into my head this morning, as I woke up from a nap. And we look outside and it's been raining, so there's um, a lot of plants that are very green and lush here, because it's kind of springtime and they're all growing, and they love the water, the rain. Like that's nourishment for them and necessary for them. And I mean, I've got a plant here on my desk that's next to me that I have. It's in the window. My wife has plants. She started to kind of go getting into planting and things like that. My daughter had a plant fundraiser for school, and we just got the plants on Monday. So we have plants outside that need to be potted and dealt with and things outside. So subconsciously, something about plants apparently has been stewing in there. And it kind of came out this morning as something that we could talk about, both from, why it's important, I guess, that, for have the plants around us, the benefits they give us. Um, just like, animals, get
Mhm.
animals, but I think it's a lot of times easier because we tend to see animals more living creatures because they're more like us because we're animals. But plants are living creatures as well, and plants have a lot of benefits for us. Having them around us, being in nature with plants is very beneficial to us. And we've talked bits and pieces about some of these things in different episodes, but maybe it would be good to kind of pull some of this stuff together, and talk a little bit more about it all in one place here today, about why we want to have plants, why plants are a great thing to have, and why I've got one plant here next to me on my table. So
Well, and why it has anything to do with spirituality, right? Because this isn't a gardening podcast. Um,
gardening with Jason, that
Gardening with Jason, well, maybe someday, who knows? But I think it's, because you bring up a point, and I think, one of the first things, for us to all remember is, like you said, I think it's easier for us to think about four-legged creatures because we're animals, like they're animals, right? And even to maybe, take it to the winged ones, of birds. Okay, well, we can kind of understand because they have a heart that's beating, right? And so, they're even though they're not a mammal, there's similarities to us,
Mhm,
right? More similar than a tree or a plant in our mind, right? Because, the tree doesn't have lungs like we do. It doesn't have a heart. It doesn't have a brain, right? We can't go to the tree and kind of point out like we could on a frog on the dissection table. Oh, there's the heart. Oh, there's the brain. Oh, there's the lungs, right? And
mhm,
so I think sometimes, people think that the plant relatives are less than somehow,
mhm. Right.
right? But they're absolutely not, right? They're sentient beings, just like we are sentient beings. They have consciousness, just like we do, right? Because consciousness doesn't come from the brain. And so they're conscious, sentient beings that are here performing their dharma, living, their part in this whole play that we're doing, right? And part of it goes back to this whole idea of connectedness as part of spirituality, right?
Mhm,
And connecting with the other sentient beings that are here on this earth, right? Because we all are connected,
mhm,
right? And it's, starting to see them as relatives instead of as a resource, right?
mhm.
Because a lot of people will talk about things like trees as a resource.
Right.
Oh yeah, we got these
Wood.
trees that are resources, so we can cut them down and make wood and paper, and we can burn it and make fires. And don't get me wrong, right? That's part of trees' uh, dharma on this earth, right? But there's more to it than just that.
Mhm,
And if we only see them as a resource to provide us with benefit, but we don't understand the symbiotic relationship and have that
mhm,
ayni with the plant kingdom, right, then we're missing out on a huge spiritual lesson and growth opportunity for us.
mhm. Yeah. So that again, I said my wife. So in the past, I would have told you that I am terrible at plants, that I have a brown thumb, that I can't keep any kind of plants alive. They always die. And so for the longest time, didn't really have plants around me. It was at a birthday party, when my niece's birthday party. One of the party favors that my sister gave everyone was a small little potted plant. Everyone to take home, and just this little, I don't even know what it kind of was, but it was some green plant of some sort that you could have, and whatever. And so okay, brought it home, and put it on my desk, and I kind of watered it occasionally when I thought to water it and stuff like that. And it kept going. It kept living. Um, and I know my mom, I think, got one and said that hers had died before that. My sister was kind of amazed because most of the ones that she had heard of other people had said that, yeah, at some point it had died. And my little plant just kind of kept doing its little thing there, on my desk. And again, like I said, I occasionally water it, and it was in on my desk, and there was windows, so it was getting natural light. And sometimes I would talk to it, and so it was doing good. And it would probably still be doing well, except that at some point my wife, uh we decided we need to repot it to give it a bigger pot. And I don't know if it was the soil or what, but it did not like that at all. And it did not survive the repotting process. But when we moved into this house, I got myself another plant. Um, Not just because I kind of felt like something was missing. Like I always had a plant on my desk next to me, and so I felt like I needed to have one now. Um, but because I like the green, I like the energy it gives off, the feeling around it. And never in the past really thought about the energy of the plants before. But you know, and I'm being around a room with a lot of plants, the room tends to just tends to be just an energy in that room than a room that doesn't have plants. And so you kind of go in the door and it just feels different somehow. Um, and it's also a really good way to kind of help me connect a little better to outside the nature, to the trees, to the woods that are outside. It's great when it's sunny out and not raining. If I can go out in the woods and I can go out and go hiking and be with the trees and the grass and all that. But a lot of times I can't do that. Middle of winter and it's snowing and everything is kind of brown and barren, or it's raining and it's muddy, and if it's not great weather for getting out. Having a plant here on my desk kind of connect allows me to connect to the plants, connects out to nature, brings a little bit of that into my office.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, like you said, there's a difference in the energy. And again, I kind of equated, or I've seen things like this. Others of you probably have felt too, right? But if you go to a big city that's just full of concrete and asphalt and steel,
Hmm.
right? It has a certain energetic feeling, right? And
Hmm.
and so I think of it just because I've been to New York a lot. When you're in Midtown Manhattan, it's just skyscrapers and steel and concrete and asphalt, right? And people and frenetic energy.
Hmm.
But you can go a few blocks and walk into Central Park. And yeah, you can look up and you can see all the buildings around. But if you're looking down, it's a completely different feel, right? Or, taking your shoes and socks off and walking on the grass, right? There's a different, feel that goes along with that and the energy because in a way it's like it's having another person with us, right? They're actual sentient beings. And so walking barefoot in the grass is like getting a massage from another being in a way, okay? Um, you can have conversations with them. And again, you may think, oh, this is crazy, right? But hey, there's been scientific research done specifically around music and talking to plants, right? Using music and also, some, words from the lyrics, but also how people talk to plants and how people talk to water as well, right? Water is
Yep.
also a sentient being. And so the crystal formation in the water is affected by, music and how it's talked to, both water and plants as well,
Mhm.
right? And part of this is an ayni kind of relationship too, right? Is uh, the plants enjoy it, and because they enjoy it, what do they want to do? They want to give back to
Reciprocate.
you, reciprocate to you, because it's part of their journey as well. So we're giving them carbon dioxide, they're giving us oxygen, right? We're watering them, they're giving us greenness, they're giving us love,
Yeah.
that's emanating off of it, right? And we can talk to them, we can express appreciation. Again, imagine if you're a tree, okay? So I have quite a few trees on my property here. And it's a subdivision, but some of these trees may have been here before my house was here, which has been about 50 years, right? And so I know that at least the trees are 50 years or newer. So imagine they've been sitting on my property watching what's going on, hearing conversations that people are having, feeling the energy that's been going on. They're a huge repository of what has gone on my property for the last 50 years.
Mm.
And they're happy to share with me and tell me what's going on if I connect with them and tune with them, and they will share with us, right? If we actually connect. Now, uh, what's interesting too is, again, a lot of people just walk right by and
Mhm.
never even notice the plants that are out there. And so how would it be if you're this tree and you've been, sitting here providing shade and providing oxygen and growing big and strong for 50 years, and no one has ever stopped to appreciate what you're doing or telling you that you're beautiful or you're handsome, right? If you're a man, how would you feel, right? If we were just standing here for 50 years and people were walking by, ignoring us, not doing anything to really help us, how would we feel? And again, I don't think the trees are holding a grudge against people, but wouldn't it be nice if somebody came by every so often and said, "My goodness, tree, you just look amazing today," right? And I said that to one of my trees this morning. Is it's one of those trees that has like how the bark kind of peels off, which is interesting because actually a member of the Yavapai Apache uh, nation was out doing some work on my property with the water, and he was talking to us about these trees that have the peeling bark. You know why they have the peeling bark? Hey, if you need to start a fire, you can go over and ask and remove just a little bit. You don't have to cut down the tree. Just
Mhm.
peel off a little bit of the bark, because that's the
Mhm.
way they grow in order to give, for people who need to use that. And so again, he was sharing with us, so that was, customary thing that they grew up knowing. And if we ever needed to do it, look, this is how you do it, right? So it was one of the trees that has the peeling bark, and just telling it again, how amazing it was, grateful for the shade that it gives me. Um, and again, maybe I'm crazy, but it feels good to do that, and it feels like the tree appreciates it. And the more that we connect with the plants, the more we care for the plants too. because here's some of the reciprocity of it. I would probably say I have a brown thumb too, right? I'm looking over and I've got a plant on my desk that pretty much is dead. But, I try. I've got another one in the other room that's doing okay, you know. But actually caring for, tending to, loving, talking to plants is a great way, again, for us to evolve spiritually and to connect with all of the sentient beings that are around us.
Mhm. And it's not just trees either. Like, I mean, we talked about trees, um, because they're kind of the big view thing you see outside or even the grass, but the plant, the small plants you have in your house. Or earlier today, I was looking outside and there are some purple irises
Ah,
outside. And so I was commenting on how beautiful they look today, giving them compliments because they are in full bloom right now. And, very lush and green plant with a nice, pretty purple, delicate flowers. And I'm like, this is just a really beautiful, plant. But they give us, they give us the oxygen, they give us beautiful smells. A lot of them can give us beautiful smells. They give us beautiful colors. The flowers, they said the iris flowers are very pretty out there. We have some earlier in the spring. We had some daffodils that had popped up that were very pretty to look at. Kind of indicated that it was springtime. When you start seeing the daffodils pop up. Um, Over where I go hiking, there was some trillium flowers, which are kind of three petaled flowers that again are one of kind of some of the first ones that grow in the spring, that are very most of the time they're kind of a pure white color, but they're really pretty to look at and they grow in different places. And so we get the beauty of the flowers. We give flowers for special occasions. Mother's Day, we give flowers to mothers and wives, and because of, we give them bouquets of flowers. Valentine's Day, give them, a dozen roses or some sort of a bouquet of flowers to show that how much we love them. And so we use the flowers to represent to us our love for them. Um, and then so it's not just the oxygen. I mean, yeah, that's great. That's part of it, but there's so much more things that plants do. They provide shade, like you mentioned with your big tree out there.
mhm,
They provide windbreak
mhm.
or sun, like we got a wooded area back here. And so in the winter, the wind blows through here when there's no leaves on the trees. But as the leaves come up here in the spring now, they kind of shelter us from a lot of that strong winds. So we generally don't get wind issues here in the summer and the spring and into the early fall when there's still leaves on the trees. They give us a lot of things. The shade you talked about, they shade us and you go underneath them. They keep things cooler. Here, they kind of block some of the sunlight sometimes. Um, just a lot of things that we get from plants on just on a physical, not just physical 3D, but that's not to say anything about the spiritual, the 5D, the other things that we get from the plants, in addition to the stuff that we see and hear and touch.
Well, and what's interesting, because again, I mean, it's easy to talk about trees, and we do it a lot, because of jokes of like hugging trees and things like that. But it's not really a joke. You want an experience. Go out and hug a tree for half an hour and see how you feel. Even only do it for a few minutes. But when we expand into all the other plants too, right? What's my hat? My hat's made out of cotton. Well, what's cotton? It's a plant, right? That produces, and it produces the cotton balls, that end up getting spun into fabric. So plants sometimes, provide us with things like fabric.
Mhm.
What do we eat, right? Besides protein, which comes from, other animal sources, most of the rest of our food is all some sort of plant based.
And those animals have to eat plants, so
And
it's
the
still,
animals, yeah,
yeah.
so it's still plant based because the animals have to eat something in order to grow
Mhm.
into the protein that we eat. but cucumbers and tomatoes and whatever it is that you eat, carrots or whatever, these are plants, as
Mhm.
well. And I think what's interesting that I've become more aware of too is there's energy that goes into the plants that is part of the food that we are eating.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, again, imagine if I'm eating a carrot and it's a carrot that was growing on some large industrial farm with chemical pesticides, fertilizers, everything else done with machinery, whatever, right? Well, that carrot is going to pick up on the energy of what's been going on as this plant has been growing. So compare that kind of a carrot to a carrot maybe that was grown by myself or by a friend who, lovingly would go out and water and hand plant and weed and talk to the carrot and tell it how much, how grateful we were for it and everything else. Again, if I'm holding two carrots in my hand, they may look exactly the same, but the energy of those two carrots is different. And part of that, again, is up to us, right? Brad said he talked to his plant. His plant liked that. Hey, you're acknowledging me, Brad. Everybody else's plants died except Brad's for a long time, right? Why? Well, part of it probably was it wasn't anything about Brad's gardening skills, but it was about probably the energy that he was giving off and talking to it and loving on it in a way that the plant thrived. And I think plants are a great way for us to learn how to love as well. When people want a dog, there's the old saying is, well, you want a dog, go get a house plant. If you can keep the house plant alive for 3 months, then maybe get a dog, right? That I think, they're an opportunity for us to learn how to care for something else as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
That was a
something,
big lesson for me with that plant too,
yeah.
is because that was my daughter was very young when I got that plant. And so that I think helped me become a better dad for her through my caring of that plant.
Mhm. Mm. Mhm. Yeah, so like I said, I think there's a lot of things we can learn from the plants, right? They do so much for us. We in turn can do so much for them. They don't
Mhm.
expect a lot.
Mhm.
I mean, most plants, if you go on vacation for a week or two, you come back, they're still alive, even though you haven't watered them. They're still hanging out there. Hey, glad to have you back home.
How was the vacation? Yeah.
That was a vacation. Tell me about it. I can tell you about what's been happening here since you've been gone, but it's and you're not crazy if you talk to plants or you talk to trees or you you know pray or whatever you want to call it as you're eating your food, and offering gratitude, for the plants or whatever it is that you may be eating, or that you may be growing, right? And I think this is one of the areas too where, especially with some of the things going on in the food supply, I would see that very soon a lot of people are going to start growing a little bit of their own food.
Mhm.
Because even in, an apartment space or other things like that, you can still grow a few plants that actually you can eat. And so, um, I, I, I think that's probably going to start coming around again too.
Could be.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I
which,
know I've been doing a lot of farmers markets
mhm,
around here. Being get the produce from the actual farmer, who picked it out of his garden or his field and brought it, and it's just like it's get that different energy about it.
Tastes different. You know, I grew up,
Hmm.
when I grew up, we had a garden all the time. And there is nothing like, going out and cutting a fresh tomato right off the vine as it's ripe and eating that versus, what comes to us from the store or anything else because, it's not just different energy that goes into it, but sometimes the food is stunted. Um, because if you take things like, like pears or other things that when they're truly ripe, they're very uh, easy to bruise and other things like
Hmm.
that. And even after they've been picked, fruit will continue to ripen. And so a lot of times, things are taken off the vines much
Hmm.
earlier just because it wouldn't survive the transportation
Bananas, in
to get there.
particular, that way.
Bananas are one way that way too. That's why they're green when they show up in the grocery store.
Yep.
But, and there's a difference when you go to the farmer's market. Do you see green bananas? Probably not because bananas don't grow
I
where
was gonna
you
say I don't
live.
see bananas at all, but yeah.
But it's just different, right?
Hmm.
It's different.
Yep.
And I think, again, from a spiritual perspective, there's a lot of ways that the plants are helping us in our spiritual journey, giving us better nourishment, even, right, is a way to help us in our spiritual growth, making us, clearer, in being able to do what we need to do. As an example, the the symbiotic relationship, the caring for, the tending of, the love, the expressing gratitude for,
Hmm.
all these different things, and even thinking about the different things that are around us. I mean, how much of my desk, an office is made up of things made out of wood,
Hmm.
just as an example, right?
Yep.
And so anyway,
Yeah.
and I think once we can start to, that's why I like the word relatives or relations, right? Because we can talk about plants, or we can think about plants as being plant relatives or plant relations. They may not look like us, but we're still
Hmm.
related in a way. Just like the four-leggeds are relatives, the
Hmm.
rocks are relatives. I like that term myself only because it helps me to remember the true connection that we have. They're not a resource, they're a relative.
Hmm.
And I think that that minor kind of switch in the words that we use helps, at least for me, put in a better context as well. To
Hmm.
always remember they're sacrificing for us and we're sacrificing for them. It's that whole ayni in process.
Well, I don't like the word sacrifice because that to me
Ah,
has the connotation of something negative that you're giving up, but we're assisting each other. We're
well,
in service for each other.
yeah, we're allowing each other to live our dharma. Because I know that was one of the things that I've been taught too is, and again, people can make their own choices. If one chooses to be a vegetarian or vegan, that's your choice, right? Some people, look at animals different than plants, right? I think it was Joseph Campbell. I won't get the quote exactly right, but he said something like, um, "The only reason people are vegetarians is because they can't hear the screams of the tomatoes." And that the idea of, like you said, sacrifice is maybe not the right word, but, you know, certain animals, certain plants, things come to this world to be of benefit to others, right? To us, to everything else, the dying. tree branch that's fallen down on the ground. What does it become? Well, food for the insects and the ants and a place for them to live, and some of these other things, right? It
Hmm.
breaks down and becomes fertilizer, if you will, in the soil, as well.
Hmm.
And, the cow that's, eating the grass and hay and other things, right? So it can produce the milk,
Hmm.
that can be used, to feed humans, to feed their babies, and can be in meat, and that instead of thinking even of eating meat as of being something cruel, would we deny a cow its dharma of providing food? You know, and that's just kind of a different perspective. But like I said, it's not. We're all here for purposes,
Hmm. Yeah.
and we all play our role. Uh, and it's about that connection and the gratitude and the understanding and the love for everybody playing their part. And plants
Hmm.
play a huge part in our lives that most people don't recognize. Without plants, we would all be dead.
Hmm.
There would be no oxygen, right? We'd all be dead. Without plants, we wouldn't have things to eat. We'd be dead.
Hmm.
But do we think about that, or do we judge and place importance on a tomato but not a dandelion because a dandelion's a weed? There's dandelion tea, as well, and
Hmm.
some of these other things that are out there. I mean, every plant has its purpose as well, and the more that I think we can connect and be grateful for what we're all bringing to it, the better.
Yeah.
And that's part of our spiritual involvement. Their involvement, our involvement as well.
Hmm. Yeah. I like to, you're talking about the different ways of seeing, like animals and things like that. Um, I like to think of, when we talk about, well, why do you eat, cows and beef and things like that? Well, if it wasn't for it being used for food, it wouldn't exist because we've specifically raised that cow or that pig or that chicken or whatever like that for the purpose of being eaten to be used for our food. So, yes, I think there's a lot of ways that we can treat animals better. Both in the way we care for them, the way we turn them into our food. But if it wasn't for the fact we were using them for food in the first place, there would be no reason for it to exist. And so, like you said, it's a different way of looking at the world, and it's not that it's a better way, or whatever, but just a kind of a different way to see that relationship between all living things, and that
Mhm.
we all have some sort of a purpose here, that we are carrying out. Um, we don't maybe know what that is for others. I think maybe it's very ego driven if we try to say, well, this is here for my use or for, XYZ purpose. We don't know that. Heck, we don't even have time to know why we're here, let alone why the cow is here or why that bird is here or why that tree is here. Um, but, again, just realizing we're all part of this big connected universe, world,
Yep.
Pachamama, all these things. Um,
Yeah, so that's why I think, again, it was important for us to talk about, I one of the practices that I have that I do most days is connection with different things on this planet. And one of them is, the plants and the trees.
mhm,
And because I think it's a very simple thing, but the more connected we can feel to things like plants, the more grateful we can be for them, the more we
mhm,
can serve them as they serve us. as well. When it's been a little dry out and we go out and we water our plants, uh, they appreciate that. It's us being of service to them because they're going to be of service to us. Your iris are going to bloom, whether you water them or not, because
Hmm.
they get enough water in the springtime that they're going to be okay. But,
Yep.
are we showing that appreciation and that gratitude as well? Because the more we do that, right, the more we're growing, the higher our frequency and vibration is going
Hmm.
as well. And so, in a way, it's not just that plants are feeding us and nourishing us in our body, but they're also a way to nourish our spirit, whether
Hmm.
that's just growing a plant in your office, or if it's growing a garden, that you're eating, if it's just saying, hey, beautiful trees and shrubs the next time you're out on a hike,
Hmm.
even just for a few seconds. But any of those things are another step and another practice for you in your growth.
Yep. Gratitude is a muscle. The
Mhm.
more you use it, the stronger it becomes.
Yep, exactly.
So,
Exactly. So today was about do plants, do
hmm.
plants. And yeah, I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing, and again, hopeful that it just raises some awareness. And again, you do it, don't do it, it's up to you. But getting a little plant, caring for a little plant, can make a big difference in a lot of people's lives. Even just
Hmm.
like I said, expressing gratitude when you go outside and you
Hmm.
see some of these things. And even if you don't live in a place, if you live in a concrete jungle, something in your house is made out of a plant. And even expressing
Desk,
gratitude,
door, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
even expressing gratitude, for, what went into making that, it all comes back,
Hmm.
in the same way. And there's easy ways for us to remember, if we want to do it. So,
Yep.
so with that, everybody have a great week, and thanks for listening. We will see you on our next episode.
See ya.